Hello and welcome back to PHP Basics. As we get further into learning Jquery and using it to communicate with external PHP pages, which kind of act as a middleman between our web page and the database, we start learning some of the complex features that this can add to your page, but ultimately enhance the user experience and just allow you to do a lot more creative things. For instance, I've got a table here. It's just showing some tabular data from my database, and I can click on any one of these and change the value. And whenever I click out of that, we're going to get this loader, and then that's ultimately going to update the database. You'll see that if we refresh, the value hasn't changed from when we changed it. So in this lesson, we're going to learn how to create JavaScript functions that apply to multiple unknown elements. We're going to work with this thing called the console, and we're going to learn some uncommon element attributes. And ultimately, we're going to further develop our skills with Jquery and Ajax and communicating with the database. So let's go ahead and get started. And since we are working with Jquery, I've gone ahead and included my script from Google here. And essentially, you can just type Google Jquery, and the first result that pops up is this script right here. So you can simply copy and paste that into the top of your page. Now, if you notice here, I've got a div element, and it simply says hello world, and we close that element. Do a paragraph break, and then below that I've got another div tag with the same content. However, I've added an attribute called content editable equals true. So if we look at these on the page, we can see that the top element is standard text. Whenever I put my cursor over it, the cursor changes to a text pointer. I can select this text, I can drag it, I can copy, whatever you do with text, right? And then below that, I've got kind of the same thing. It looks the same, it acts the same way, but whenever I click on it, we now get this outline around the entire div. And it's obvious that we can type in here now, right? And then if I click off of that, then the text changes. Ultimately, if I refresh the page, it's going to go back to what the saved data was. But this content editable tag is what actually allows us to change things in line on the page. And that's what we're going to talk about doing today. So ultimately, we're going to use some inline attributes that perform various functions through Java. And that will allow us to connect with Ajax and connect to external PHP, which connects to the database, so on and so forth, kind of like I talked about at the beginning of the lesson. Okay, so what I can do here is I can do on blur, which essentially means whenever you click off of this, it's going to do something, and we can call a function. Okay, and I'm going to create a function just called update value. And whenever I click on the box, click off of the box, it's going to do something. Okay, so let me create my script tags. And inside here, I'm simply going to type function update value, and this is set up just like a standard function would be in PHP, only now we need to learn how we can connect this function or this element to this, which is ultimately right now, if I click out of it, it's going to do something. But if I have multiple tags, how is it going to know which element I'm talking about, right? So I'll just do a parameter here. We'll call it element. And for the element value, we're just going to say this. Okay, so if I simply do an alert, right, and I come back in and I refresh the page and I click on hello world, I click off of it, then I'm going to get an alert from the page. Okay, so if I go back in and take a look, we can do something more with this. Now, what is this value? If I do elements, meaning I'm going to show an alert to the user, and I'm going to alert what this is. Obviously, this is an element of some sort. So if I refresh my page and click on it again, let me take off my semicolon. Now, whenever I click off, it's telling me this is an object, and this object is an HTML div element, which it is, right? If I wanted to get the actual value out of this, I have to find the inner text of this element. So that's simple enough. We can just type element dot inner text, and I'll refresh the page again and run this. We can now see that the alert is showing us hello world. Now, this is just part of debugging and testing your application. And a lot of times you may want to debug in a live environment and you don't want to show this to everybody who's using your page at the time. You may want to send something to the developers, but not necessarily to the users. All right, so let me hit OK here and we'll go ahead and come back into our page. I'm going to get rid of this first hello world here. And instead of sending alert, I'm going to type console.log, and this is going to send whatever's in these parentheses here to the console. All right, and I'll show you how that works. We'll go ahead and refresh the page. I'm going to click on, and then I'll click off. Nothing happens because we don't have that alert anymore. But if we press F12, which this works for Chrome and Internet Explorer, I'm not sure about Safari, Opera, or Firefox. But if we click on console, then we can see the output. I could switch this out with a string just saying, hey, it worked. And if I refresh the page again, I obviously typed something wrong. There we go. Then it's going to show, hey, it worked. So this is a way that we can use the console to communicate code, or communicate debugging information and error messages off of the page. Okay, and this works with obviously JavaScript and jQuery, but it can also show you some of your PHP errors as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. Now that we have a basic concept of how this works, I'm also going to create another function, and we'll just say onClick. And this is going to equal some sort of function. I'll just call activate, and we'll do the same kind of thing. We're going to activate this. Now, if you look at my original example, whenever I click on something, it turns it into this kind of text style box, and nothing else really happens until I click off of it. So I need a function that happens before we click off of it to change the look and the style of that. So just before I get too far along and copying and pasting a whole bunch of stuff in here, I want to go ahead and get my script the way that it's going to be throughout. And I can simply create another function. I'll just do it on top of this one. We'll create function. And the function's name is going to be activate, and we'll give it the same parameter of element. Okay, so now we can simply say alert, and we'll say clicked. So now if I refresh the page and I click on hello world, it's going to show the alert before I click off of it. So this will give us a chance to style some of this when we get a little bit further ahead. So I'll go ahead and I'll keep this div right here just for future reference. But what I want to do is I want to show some of I want to pull the information from the database and show it on the page to populate this table in the first place. So what I'll do at the top of the page is I'll put in my PHP tags, and I'm going to include my database. We'll say include db.inc.php. And if we take a look at that real quick, here I am connecting to PDO. Essentially, I'm going to try to create a variable by initiating a new PDO class. Driver is MySQL, my host is localhost, my database name is test, specifying a character set of UTF-8, and then my username and password. If that fails, then it's going to catch the PDO exception, assign it to the variable E, kill the script, and ultimately display that error message on the screen. Okay, so that just kind of runs in the background, and I'm going to create a query, and we'll just say SQL, and it's going to equal select all from employee. Now I'll create a variable called query, and this is going to equal a new instance of DB, and we're going to issue a prepare, and we'll use the string from my SQL variable. Okay, so now all we have to do is execute that query by typing $query and execute. All right, so further on down the page, now that I've got the data ready, I can hold on to it until I want to display it somewhere else on the page. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll start a table. I'll just say table, and we'll close that table, and I'll go ahead and create some table headers. So we have like the first name, and I'll go ahead and populate these real quick. All right, and then I'm going to break back into my PHP, and this is where I'm going to display the data from the database. So I can simply grab some values. So we'll say while row equals query fetch, and I'll do some shorthand variables just to keep our code simple and speed it up just a little bit. So I'll say F for the first name. So we'll say row first name, and this is the column in the database. And I'll go ahead and copy these. And then I'm going to break out of PHP because it's going to be much cleaner if I do that. And the reason is when we start passing parameters to a JavaScript function inside of the element itself, you start having to put double quotes inside of single quotes and single quotes inside of double quotes, and by the time you're done escaping everything, it's just wicked confusing. So it's easier just to do it here, plus I can break things out just a little bit more and explain them better. Okay, so now that I'm inside of a table, I'm going to create a table row, and ultimately I'll kill that table row. I'm going to do a table data tag, and I'm going to put my div tag in here below. Let me go ahead and copy this, and I'm just going to paste it right here, and then I'll close that. Okay, so this is where I need to start thinking about how I'm going to update my database. This update value is ultimately going to have to grab the column that we're talking about, a unique identifier, and then obviously the value. Okay, so if I'm looking at my database, right? So if I'm doing a standard update on my database, I would do update employee, set first name equals something, where row equals, let's say 12. Okay, so that is the format that we have to follow. So we're going to have to pass the database or the table name, a variable for the column. We don't know which column it's going to be at the time. And then we also have to send this unique identifier with it. Okay, so if I was doing this in prepared statements, I would ultimately prepare my query something like update employee set column equals a value where ID equals an ID limit 1 or something like that. And the reason I would have to specify the column as a variable and not a placeholder is because it needs this before it can actually use the placeholders. So there's no getting around this, and we'll get to that here in just a minute. Okay, but that's kind of the methodology that we're going to have to use and the mindset that we need to be cognizant of whenever we get to that point. Okay, so right now, if I were to go ahead and display my page, we're going to get a lot of issues, and that's because my title is actually, where am I at here? Job title. There we go. All right, let's try this again. Hello world, hello world, hello world. Okay, and that's because we are simply displaying hello world, and to display the name I would have to put PHP echo F. Okay, so now if we refresh, we're going to see each person's first name, and you can see that we can click on that, and when we do, it shows you, it just shows clicked. And hey, it worked. Now that we've got stuff actually showing up on the page from our database, we can start to work on this a little bit more and get the functionality down for one single column, the first name column, before we start copying and pasting this to all the other values. It's a lot easier if we get one thing working and then we can copy it to all the other things, as opposed to setting up all of the columns now and displaying the first name, last name, job title, and salary, and then realizing we need to change something and we have to change it on every single one of them. So right now we're going to focus on this update value function, which is actually sending our information to the database. And if you're not familiar with functions, then I guess you could say this is where this might get a little complicated. So since currently we are working on the first name, then obviously in our database, the column that we're working with is going to be first name as well. So I'm going to put a comma here, and as a string, I'll just say first name. Okay, so one thing I did not grab from the database was the ID. So let me go ahead and create a variable called ID, and that's going to equal row ID. And this is what we're going to use to send back to the database. Now, more than likely, you're going to want to work with an encrypted value of this, just, so people don't see the raw ID of that row. They can go into the developer mode and change that to another ID, and then you're screwing everything up, right? So I'll go ahead and do an MD5 value for simplicity and close that off. And then I want to echo this out as this third parameter. So what I'm going to do is I'll do a comma, and then I'll do single quotes because we're currently inside of a double quote, if you can see here on each side of this function. All right, so what I'll do is I'll just do our standard echo. So I'm going to break into, I'll tell you what, let me just copy and paste this, keep it simple. And instead of echoing out the first name, I'm going to echo out ID. Okay, so remember, this is only happening when we click out of the box. So what I can do, first off, let me hide this clicked function, because every time I click on something, it's going to pop up an alert. I don't want that right now. So let me do this. So we know we can get the value by doing element.enterText. So we're referencing the element as this. Now I want to specify the column. So I'll just say column and then the ID. So you can see that we're actually passing this into this. We're passing this into this and echoing out this and sending it to this. And then we can create other things here. Okay, so the element itself is not actually the text that's inside of this element. So I'm going to create a variable just called var, and I'll call it value. And that's going to equal element.enter text. Okay, so we can simply reference this value as opposed to having to type this out every single time. So now let's go ahead and test to make sure that we're actually seeing what we want. And I'll do that through the console. So I'm just simply going to type console.log like we did before. Only now, instead of specifying what kind of text I want to see, I'm just going to pass through each one of these parameters. So we'll say value plus column plus ID. All right, so this will let us know if it's at least accepting the values that we're wanting to. Now, by using a plus, that's simply concatenating these. There aren't going to be any spaces, but it will at least give us an idea that the values are correct. Okay, so let me go ahead and refresh my page. We will find out very quickly here whether this is going to work or not. Click off of it. So I see Jane first name and then this long string of characters, which is actually the MD5 value of the ID. So this is perfect. That means that we've got the data that we want. Now all we have to do is send it to that database and let that thing do its work. Okay, so let me go ahead and get rid of this thing hanging out down here that says hello world. And I'm simply going to copy this and paste it a few more times. And I'm just going to change some of these values, like the first name. I'll change that to last name and change what we're actually showing on the page. Title, salary, kind of do the same thing here. And refresh our page. All right, so now we can see that we're displaying all of this information. And regardless of which column I click on and click out of, we can see now that the name is Smith and the column is actually last name. And that's what we're going to pass through as a variable to tell our SQL query which column to actually update, or which one of these values to update. Okay. First name, last name, title name, salary name. Let's fix that real quick. Okay, so now that we're back inside of our function, I'm going to get rid of this because it's not really useful at this point. And I'm going to launch the Jquery, or I'm sorry, the Ajax function here. So I'll do $.ajax, and we have worked with this before. So I'm not going to explain everything, or everything that Ajax can do, but I'm only going to talk about the methods that we want to use inside of the Ajax function. Okay, so the first one's going to be the URL, and this is simply saying that this is where we're specifying the file that's going to do all of the PHP, and that's going to be backend.php. You can see I've already got a file here prepared for that. So whenever we pass these values through, we'll be ready for it. Do a comma after that. We're going to do a type, and this is actually going to show the request method. So if you're working in a form and you had to specify the method, it would either be get or post. In this case, it's going to be post. And then we have to specify the data. Real quick, let me give you a quick example here in just a blank page. So if I was to create a form, I would give it a method of post. So we'll just say method equals post. The action is going to be the page that's going to process. So we'll just say for this reference, backend.php. And let's say we had like an input type and it was a text and it had a name. We'll just give this name value. And then we're going to type some stuff into this text field, not like that, obviously, as value. And whenever we submit this, then we're going to check to see if the form has been submitted. And then we're going to get the post value of whatever this name was here. And this is kind of the same way Ajax works in Jquery. So we're specifying, this is kind of like the action of the form. This is the method of the form. And these are kind of like the data names from each one of those text boxes or whatever. So this is what we're actually sending to the database. Now this is an array. So we've got our curly braces here, and I'm going to create a string called value, and that's simply going to equal value. All right. I know that can sound a little confusing, but let me explain. Okay, this is kind of like the variable name. This is the name that we're going to be sending to the database. This is actually the value that's going into this variable. Okay, so you can think of it like that. If we name this like div value, then I would put div value here, and maybe that would separate that out just a little bit. So our second parameter is going to be column, and we'll just leave that the name of column because we're grabbing the value of this first name, last name, title, salary is going to be passed through to this column here. And then finally the ID, and that's simply going to equal the ID parameter. So after this, I'll put another comma, and you have to make sure that you specify commas after each one of these or else it will fail miserably. And the last one, we're going to display something if there's a success. So there's a success property on here as well. And this has to be in the form of a function. I'm just going to call this PHP result because it's going to display whatever we result back from the PHP file. So for now, I'll just say console.log PHP result. So whatever happens in this file here, if this is successful, then it's going to display whatever we echo out or return from this backend. So I don't even have to use PHP at this point. I could just say Ajax was successful. And if I save that, save my page, and providing I don't have any syntax errors, then it's going to send a reference of value, column, ID to this PHP page, which it's not accepting at the moment, but it is going to read the contents of this and ultimately send it back out to the console. All right, so let's give this a shot. Refresh my page. Immediately, I don't have any errors over here. So let's just click on this software architect, click off of it, and it says Ajax was successful. So it is successfully communicating with that PHP page. Okay, so now let's take it a little bit further. Let's go ahead and get rid of this. Since we are connecting to the database, I will connect or include my database connection one more time. And now if I treat this like a form, right? So typically I would say like if is set post value of a submit button. Then I would start processing, like data 1 equals the post value of name and password and email address, things like that. But in this case, we don't have a submit button. We have a value, a column, and an ID. And really, I don't have to check to see if any of them are set because I know that they're going to be. But just to be safe, then I'll go ahead and just say ID. And this can we can check to see if any of these are set, but they're all going to be set at the same time. All right, so basically what I'll do is I'll create a new variable called value, and that's going to equal the post value of value. That is a lot of value. All right, so I'll copy and paste this for the other two values, and you can start to see how this works. So we have the column, it's going to be column, and then the ID, which is still the MD5, so let's not forget that. All right, so if I were just to echo value column ID, then now this is what's going to be sent back to the console. All right, so it kind of looks like what we did before. Let me restart this. In fact, at this point, we don't even have to refresh the page because each time we click off of this, it's going to reach out to that PHP file in real time. So our days of refreshing the page are over until we start styling this thing, right? And we can obviously see here architect, title. We've got these little dashes in here now that I specified inside of our PHP page. So awesome. This means that everything is working. At this point, all we have to do is send that value to the database just like we would any other query or any other form, right? So like before, I'll prepare this statement just by creating a variable called SQL. And the reason I'm doing this is so I don't have as many long lines and I can keep my font bigger because I know you guys like big font that you can read on your phones, right? So we'll just say update employee set column equals to value, which is this is just the placeholder where MD5 ID equals, and then the ID placeholder that we'll fill in later, and then limit 1. The last thing we want to do is mess something up and apply this to every single user in the database. That would be chaos. All right, so now I'll do query, and it's going to equal DB, and we're going to prepare, and I'll simply plug in my SQL variable. All right, so now in our index page, whenever we wanted to populate the data, we weren't passing any parameters or variables into the query itself, and now we are. We've got this value in this column, so we need to bind these values to these placeholders here. We simply do query bind param, and then we're going to reference the placeholder. So first we'll do value, and then comma, and then the variable name. Now it is required to put the colon inside of the placeholder in the query itself. However, when binding the parameter PDO just knows. So you're not required to use that colon here. All right, so we'll copy and paste this, and we'll just populate that with the ID. And now I'll say if query execute, then we're going to echo update successful. We'll say else echo failure. All right, so let's go ahead and give this a try. Let me go ahead and not refresh my page. I'm just going to click on one of these names. We're going to take Taylor and we're going to turn it into Lillian. And we'll click off of that and we'll say update successful. If I refresh my page, we can see that it still says Lillian. So obviously this works. Okay, and it doesn't matter which one of these I change. We can change this to 55,000, click off of it. It's going to show update successful. If I refresh the page, then we can see that it still retains the value that we changed it to. So this is really the meat and potatoes of this lesson and the functionality. I guess the first part is to make sure that it's functional. The second part is to make sure that your code is cleaned up. And the third part is to make it look pretty. So I know this video has gotten kind of long, but if you want to stick around, I'm going to style this. If you remember in my first part of this, we've got a table and we've got the alternating colored rows, and whenever we click on it, then it's going to create this text box looking thing. Whenever we click off of it, we've got this loader. So that's what I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do now. If you're going to leave the video at this point, I appreciate you watching. Feel free to leave a comment below, or if you have any questions, let me know. I usually respond to Skype, and if you want to do a little digging, you can find my Skype username in the comment sections of some of my other videos. So right now I'm just going to go ahead and jump back into this to this index page, and we're going to start styling this thing. All right, so let's start by styling the table. I'm just going to reference the table element, and I'm going to do a border collapse, and that's just going to equal collapse. And to clean this up just a little bit, let's just keep this on the same line. All right, so then I'm going to work with my table data and my table header, and I'll simply say it's going to have a padding of 5px. We'll give them a width of 200px. If we look in Chrome, if we click on one of these, we get this blue box around here, right? I don't know if it does this in other browsers. I know it doesn't in IE, but we're going to get rid of this as well. So we can simply do that by putting outline is none. And we'll also specify that for the div tag as well. So we'll say outline is none. And then also for our table data, we also need to specify a border. So we'll say border is going to be 1 pixel. It's going to be solid. We'll just make it a light gray color. Okay, so now if we look at this, we have something that kind of looks like this. I want to turn my table headers a darker color as well. So we'll just reference th, say background is going to be 333. And our color will be white. Okay, so now if we look at it, we have something that kind of looks like this, which represents kind of what we had over here. All right, so now to get the alternating rows, that's pretty simple as well. We're just going to reference the TR, which is the table row. And for the nth child, and we'll do this on odd, we're going to change the background to DDD, which is a light gray as well. Make sure you have semicolons between each property. So now whenever we refresh the page, we should see something that looks like this. Now remember, whenever we click on these before, it showed a nice text looking box here. So let's go ahead and do that next. I'm going to create class, and that's going to be called, I can't believe I typed class. I'm going to create a class called activate, which is the same name as the function that happens whenever we click on something. So we'll do, the background is going to be white, and we're going to have to specify a 3-dimensional looking text box. We'll say border top is going to be 1px solid, and then like a darker color like 333, and we can specify different values for each one of these borders. So border left is going to be the same. Border right and border bottom are going to be different colors. I'll just make this a light color here. All right, so I'll go ahead and give this a little bit of padding. We'll do 2px. Just to get it off the walls, and then we have to call this class whenever that particular element is clicked. We can simply do that by typing $element.attr for attribute, and the attribute obviously is the class, and we're going to change that to activate. Okay, so now whenever I refresh my page and I click on one of these, You can see now we have this obvious text box here. So whenever somebody clicks on this, they obviously know, hey, I can type in this form and I can change something. The last part is, well, not the last part, next to last part, we can see that if I click on this, it changes it, but kind of sticks there. Nothing really makes it go away after I've clicked out of the box, right? So to do that, all I have to do is cancel this class, and I can simply come down here, and whenever we kick off our update value, I'm simply going to say $element dot, I'm actually in the wrong spot, and the success is where we're going to do that. So we'll just say element dot remove attr, and the A is capital, and then class. Okay, so now if we refresh this again, if I click on something, it's going to turn it to the text box, click off of it, and it's going to go away and turn it back into its original color. All right. So the last part of this is to do that little loader icon. So as it's updating the database, we'll see that loader, and whenever the loader goes away, obviously the update is completed. All right, so I'm going to create one more class here, and I'm just going to call this processing. So this is fairly simple. We're going to change the background, and we're going to use that loader as part of the background. That way we don't have to allocate any special absolute positioning of div tags or anything like that. So I'll simply say URL, and I'm going to reference my loader icon, which is in my img directory /loader.gif or GIF, whatever you prefer. I'm going to say no repeat, and we're going to align it to the right hand side. Now, to make sure that the size of this loader stays inside of our element, we're just going to say background size is contain. So obviously we're not telling it to load this class here anywhere. So that's what we need to do next. So inside of my function, before we kick off the Ajax portion of this, we'll simply say, well, I tell you what, I can just copy this element up here, pop it in right here, and we're going to change this to processing. Okay, so now if I refresh the page, click in, click off of it, real quickly, you can see that loader icon. We're working with localhost, and we can update the database in a fraction of a second. So just to make sure that you can see that loader icon, I'm just going to come in here and I'll say sleep 1. So we're going to put our PHP script to sleep for 1 second. And now if I click off of this, you can see the loader, and then it's going to go away. Anyway, so this completes the functionality of this entire thing. This is really good. Like I said, if you got kind of a phone directory, or if you just want to update your database without logging into PHP, MyAdmin, or whatever the case may be, this gives you an idea of how to do that. So thank you so much for watching. If you have anything to add to this, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave those below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.